Welcome to the Extraordinary Vets podcast, where we believe that every career tells a story. I'm your host, Donna Harris. I'm a veterinarian at Michigan State University and a futurist. My mission is to tell the stories of those creating the future of our profession. If you ask young kids what they want to be when they grow up, two of the most common answers is an animal doctor and an astronaut. Well, our guest today is both. I'm excited to share the microphone with a very special guest, Dr. Richard Linnehan, a veterinarian and NASA astronaut. He's taken 4 trips to space, and we are excited to hear about his career. Welcome to Dr. Linnehan.
Hi, Donna. How are you? How's everyone this morning?
We're good. Thanks so much for joining us. Um, First, shout out to Dr. Michelle Harkey, a mutual friend of ours that connected us. Both of you are Buckeyes, so I gotta give a
Yeah.
shout out to the Ohio State. Um, but I think you guys should adopt me because my parents are both from Ohio, so I can be partial Buckeye, can't I?
Um, yeah, but a little bit more background. I'm not from Ohio. I'm from New Hampshire, but my state sent me there in a contract to Ohio. So I'm kind of like the redheaded stepchild too when I go to Ohio State games. So
Okay, great. I like to hear that then. And I've only been to one Ohio State game, but it was not at Ohio State. Unfortunately, it was at Michigan, and I'm not a Michigan fan, so I
I
was
remember the days of at Ohio State watching Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes, and that was quite a spectacle. You didn't even have to watch the game; you just watched those two guys.
I bet that
They
was
were
fun.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you started out your journey in New Hampshire. Were you a kid were you into animals growing up? Were you kind of a nerdy kid or were you a kid into sports? What was it like growing up?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Massachusetts, moved to New Hampshire when I was about, I guess, like 12, and finished off school in New Hampshire. Went to college in Maine, and then New Hampshire, and then got into veterinary college out at Ohio State because the state of New Hampshire didn't have any vet schools at the time. They had just opened Tufts, and truthfully, I wanted to go there to stay back east, but Tufts wouldn't take any New Hampshire residents because they got mad that the state didn't give them all the contracts. So they said, "Well, none of you can go here." So we ended up going to Ohio State, all of us being 2 people from the state that year. So, and from there I bounced all over the place and ended up here in Houston. Been here now. She's been here now for over 30 years, half my life in Houston.
So when you were at Ohio State and started into vet school, what did you think you were going to do when you graduated? Dogs, cats, mixed animal, large animal? What did you think you were going to do?
Well, I like everyone in vet school, you kind of, get the cane and start tapping around trying to figure things out early on. It's like, do I want to do small animal, large animal, mixed practice, things of that nature. And uh, I always wanted to do, it's weird, right? But I always just wanted to do marine mammals and maybe horses. So I did horses on the side and some large animal stuff. But my main interest, I never really wanted to be in small animal practice. Like, all my good friends at Ohio State are now multimillionaires from small animal practice.
Yeah.
Dumb old me, I was just going to do what I wanted to do. And I ended up doing that. But the road to marine mammal medicine or zoo animal medicine is, I don't know, fraught with peril in terms of kind of keeping the momentum up to get where you want to go. So I was just lucky in a lot of ways. Things fell into place. I did the zoo residency, and I knew Sam Ridgway, and he had asked the Navy to bring me out and help him with the marine mammal project. So in 1988, I finished 2 years at the Baltimore Zoo and left for San Diego. And the best part of that job was, well, in between, I had to go to basic training in the Army, and it was like the movie Stripes. It was nuts. It was funny, but sad in a lot of ways too. And I ended up out in San Diego. It was half a year in San Diego, a quarter of the year in Hawaii, and a quarter of the year in Key West. So it didn't, as they say, suck too much.
No, those are great places to be. So
Yeah.
you did this residency in marine mammal. After 2 years, then joined the Army. But then the Army then you were with the Navy. So
Yeah, it's all confusing, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I did a residency in zoo medicine at the Baltimore Zoo and
Okay.
comparative pathology at Johns Hopkins, but my main interest was marine mammals. So I worked some of the time at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. Dr. Mike Stoskopf was there at the time. Dr. Mike Cranfield was at the zoo. And I did marine mammal stuff. And in the meantime, I take summers when I was in vet school and get down to the Keys and work at a couple marine mammal
Mm.
stations down there. And I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. When I was at the University of New Hampshire, I worked in the diagnostic lab, and we're coastal. So we actually used to get more than a few pinnipeds and small cetaceans that wash up, and they'd bring them in and we post them. And I was just got really, really interested in the physiology and anatomy of marine mammals, and just decided that, I'm a veterinarian, but, maybe I'll go work at SeaWorld or do research or something like that. And I just got very lucky that Sam Ridgway kind of noticed me and asked me to come out and work with him.
That's amazing. So your interest in marine mammals started way back in undergrad with that opportunity, it sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
And, I practiced small animal medicine for a year, and I did equine pleasure horse stuff and large animal. And I bounced around. I was the only guy in the practice when I was there who would do exotics, because it was before my zoo residency, but no one then would touch birds or lizards or anything. So I would be the guy that, did all that stuff. And I really loved it. I didn't really love small animal practice, but so that hence the residency, and then where it went from there.
Yeah, I did a little bit of a stint at a zoo in Indianapolis. It's real interesting. It's
It's a
just
nice
different. It
zoo,
challenges us.
Indianapolis Zoo. It's a really nice zoo.
Yeah, it was nice back then, and it's even better now. That was
Yeah,
some years ago. I'm dating myself for sure. Um,
no.
but I love that you just kind of followed your interest, but also you got some great opportunities. So you went out and you did the Army with the Navy, right? It sounds like you were pretty content about that, but wait a minute, somewhere along the way, you got interested in the space program because you were accepted as an astronaut candidate. So becoming the first veterinarian as an astronaut in the astronaut corps, how did that work out? What's that selection process like?
Well, you alluded to it a little bit ago when you said, what kid doesn't want to be an astronaut, I guess, or a veterinarian when they grow up. But, from the time I think they landed on the moon when I was 11, and I remember my grandfather taking me out in the yard, and it was night, and he pointed up at the moon. He goes, there are guys walking on that thing right now. And I'm like, holy, I just, it amazed me. And I said, you know what, I want to do that someday. But, you start meandering all over the place, and then you end up where career wise in a totally different place. But at the time, there was a shuttle program. They were flying, pilots, pilot and co-pilot in the shuttle. They don't like to be called co-pilot, so they're the pilot and the commander, which is
Mhm.
actually the pilot and the co-pilot. But
Okay.
they had started to decide that, well, we need some scientist types and all that, and they were hiring, geologists, doctors, physicists. And I decided, it's like, well, they need a veterinarian. They just don't really know it yet. And then, at the time, Reagan was going to build the first space station, Freedom, and they were talking about flying lab modules for animals, and quite a bit was going to go on there. And of course, it all got downscaled and defunded. But when I applied to the program, that was in the works, so to speak, and they figured out that, well, we don't know how to do any of this. We need a veterinarian. And I think because of my military time,
Mhm.
and let's go back a little bit there too. You talked about that, so I'll explain it. I finished my zoo residency, and I was ready to go work at a zoo or go work for SeaWorld if they would hire me, or wherever I could go to do exotic and marine. And then at the time, the Navy, I got this call from the Navy, and I'm like, huh, hello. And they go, hey, would you like to come out and take care of our marine mammal program? And I thought about it. I said, well, does the Pope wear a funny hat? Yeah, I'll do that. But here's the kicker: you have to join the Army. So at the ripe old age of, I think, 32 or 31, I can't remember, I had to go to basic training in the Army. So I had to go, after I finished the zoo residency, to San Antonio, Texas, and did like I can't remember. I think it was 3 months or 4 months of training in the AMED, the medical corps of the Army that takes doctors and veterinarians and dentists and all that stuff. And so, it was like in some ways being in the movie Stripes, going through that whole training with these guys. They shot at us, with we climbed stuff, we fell off stuff, we hurt ourselves.
Could they have picked any place hotter than San Antonio, Texas for all that?
Well, they could have, but luckily they didn't. It was pretty hot out there. So I finished that and then went to San Diego. And from there on, I was the only Army guy, Army veterinarian at a naval base. So I remember the first couple of weeks I was there, they have these things called change of command ceremonies where everybody shows up in their dress uniforms. And of course, I'm in my Army greens that I've, and hardly ever wore. And everybody there is in white. See a white, and there's this guy in a green uniform. And one of these, an elderly lady walked up to me. She thought I was a bus driver and asked her where the next bus was to. And so that was the beginning of my Army career. And from then on in, I think I wore that uniform maybe 2 times over the course of like 5 years. And most of the time you're in UDTs and flip flops and sweats and in and out of the water. So it was a great job. And I said this before, but I was about half the year in San Diego and then a quarter of the year in Key West and a quarter of the year in Hawaii. So it was pretty nice. So we moved the animals all over the place and deployed with them all over the world. And I learned a whole lot about marine mammals and decided when I was done that I would like to continue on in marine mammals. But as I said, the shuttle program, which I've always been following, we're hiring mission specialists. So I said, you know what? I'm going to put my application in. Like I said, they just don't know they need a veterinarian yet. And lo and behold, I guess they thought they did need a veterinarian. And I was weird enough. My application was so strange that they said, well, we better interview this guy because he'll never get a job otherwise when he gets out. And I went to Houston. I got an interview, and that's the whole thing, right? For everybody out there who interviewed for vet school or jobs, you could have a good interview, you could have a bad interview, it depends on the day, how well you do and what happens. And I happened to have a pretty good interview. And about 8 weeks later, they mailed me and asked me called me if I wanted to join the astronaut corps. So I had to, think twice, probably 3, 4, 5 times. Do I want to leave all this? And, because pretty much giving up veterinary medicine, not giving it up, but only doing consultations and things on the side related to the space program. But it was too good of an opportunity to get to fly in the shuttle. So I did that. And I moved to Houston in 1992, and I've been here ever since. I'm retired now. I retired as of December of last year, 2025. So, it's been kind of a convoluted career, so to speak, but I've done some pretty cool things, and I was lucky to be able to fly in the shuttle. I just watched the Artemis launch and the mission, and I thought that was great. We finally made it back, I would say, to the moon, but we went around the moon, not back to it yet, but hopefully, we're only about 50 years late doing that, so hopefully we'll get there. I always thought that I would get to go, which is one of the reasons I joined the astronaut corps, because when I interviewed, they told us we'd be on the moon in 5 years, and that was 1992. So you can see how politics and funding affect space and everything else. But hopefully, with the way things are going now, we'll end up doing what we should have done, which is put a base on the moon and have permanent human habitation up there in the next, say, 20 years.
Yeah. Do you think that's where we're heading on there?
Yeah, I think so. How do you say this, without getting into politics, but it all depends on the drive of the present administration, what they want. Long-term goals, unfortunately, don't jibe or dovetail too well with short-term politics and funding. So how do you keep up, a 50-year view when you're living on a 2 to 3 year, life cycle in politics? I'm hoping it will, because, as Stephen Hawking says, you don't want all your eggs in one basket. So, the moon's a stepping stone to Mars. And, someday I do believe we'll have a colony on Mars, a human colony on Mars. And that just gives us a better chance of not going the extinction route like every other species on this planet.
That's right. So when you think about a veterinarian on Mars, do you think we'll bring animals there? Do you think we'll take animals there as companions, or do you think for food, or how do you think about the veterinarian?
I think a combination of all of that. I'm sure that at some point we'll bring companion animals up there, and we'll probably have research. Research not labs but venues. We may bring farm animals up there. Doing research in a lower G environment could be advantageous. I think at some point we're going to figure out how to make edible protein, and get past this whole,
Mhm.
this is my idea, get past this whole, methane problem and, feedlot problems and the ever increasing issues with, food animal medicine and, figure out a way to feed people by growing protein. The Dutch have already done it. A few other countries and some companies have done it. So that may be part of it. But yeah, we'll definitely have animals in the moon. I think probably mostly companion animals for the people who live up there.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. I want to go back a minute to when you were applying to the Space Corps. Did you have to sell them on the idea of the of veterinary value, not you specifically, the value of a veterinarian, or were they kind of like, huh, well, now we got this application, we can see the value of it?
That's a good question, and it wasn't the Space Force, although they exist now. It was just NASA, the NASA Astronaut Corps. Although the NASA Astronaut Corps may end up folding into the Space Force, depending on where the Space Force goes. But the Corps is a civilian agency, and the Space Force is a branch of the military now. But most of the pilots and most of the mission specialists who come to NASA as astronauts are previous military. And in a
Mm.
weird way, so was I, but not for the reasons that they bring them in, like, Rios or pilots or things of that nature.
I think that's interesting. So let's talk about some of your trips out on space. Now, you went up in 98 as a payload commander. First of all, what's payload commander? You kind of told us the difference between a co-pilot and a commander. What's a payload commander?
Well, my flights were 96, 98, 2002, and 2008. And the two people that sit up front in the shuttle, as I said, are the commander and pilot, i.e., the pilot and the co-pilot. But they don't like being called co-pilots, so the main pilot's the commander, so the co-pilot doesn't have to be called co-pilot; he could be called pilot. So there you go. And then the people in the back are the mission specialists, the people who help with navigation, control, look at all the systems on the way up and down to make sure everything's running right while they fly it. And then the scientists, ergo me, although I may not, qualify as a scientist, mission specialists are the science people. And as a veterinarian, I think they looked at me initially as, well, we're going to build this station. We're going to fly animals. We're going to have lab animals, things of that nature. We may fly primates again. And, they're all like, we don't know any of this stuff. And like I said, most of them were military guys in the selection committee because they're previous and past astronauts. And so they look at me and say, well, he's a veterinarian. And he's got all these air hours and different aircraft, and he's done deployments here and there. So he knows how to, operate with equipment. And I just looked so weird to them that they said, well, we better interview him because, if I had applied, and I'm not knocking this, but if I applied with like 5 years of small animal practice, they'd say, well, that's nice. But I mean, he hasn't, he doesn't have any military experience. He doesn't have, flight experience, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, I think that's an invalid premise to make, but I'm just setting the stage for how these people thought when you saw them. So you had to kind of, I won't say, I don't want to say fool them, but you had to just impress upon them that, you were able-bodied and you could do a lot of different things, vast in the military, in space hardware, survival-wise, flying jets, doing EVAs, and oh, by the way, a little bit of veterinary medicine when you're up there.
I think that's really great for veterinarians who want to do something different like you to think about what other skills they bring to the table. Yes, you're right. Veterinary medicine could or a veterinarian could probably do some of this without that, but you brought a lot of other skills. So, like you said, they didn't know what to do with you, but they knew you were the right person. So I think that's
Well,
important for people to think about.
I don't know if I don't know if they still if they know I was the right person or not, but I'm gone, and I've been trying to get another. I've been trying to get more veterinarians in for the application process, and about 3 or 4 have applied. Some of them made it to the last round. Unfortunately, haven't got selected, but I really think that especially when we get to Mars and a lunar presence, that we're going to need veterinarians just because of we're all biased, right? But what health professional is more well-rounded than we are in terms of public health, animal, which transcends over to human side medicine, drugs, pharmacology, food production, One Health. There isn't any. It's us. And that's going to be increasingly more and more important, especially when we go, we've got 1 or 2 people on board with only with the skills like that are going to be needed. It's probably going to be a veterinarian.
Yeah, that's great that you're encouraging others that have had that dream. So those of us that are past the age where we could fulfill that dream, talk
Don't sell yourself short.
give us a little bit of, so you were basically, when you were the payload commander, you were basically up there doing some science experiments. So we as veterinarians, we know how to do an experiment or some basics at that, but what's that like in a weightless? Like when you were doing things, what are the differences in a weightless environment that we can't imagine?
Well, as the payload commander, so we talked about, up front and back. So the mission specialists were the science people, and the pilots flew the thing. Then we had a science crew, and they called them the payload crew because there were science payloads. And on my first flight, I was mission specialist 1, and I was part of the payload crew. On my second flight, I was the payload commander, so I was the lead person in the science crew who everyone else answered to. And that was STS-90, that was Neurolab. And at the time, and actually still, I think when you look back on it, it was one of the most advanced science flights ever flown by any space agency on the planet, and still goes that way because of what we flew on the shuttle. Although there's been a lot of good science going on in space on the station now, they can't match the number of animals we flew and the number of condensed experiments we did in the timeline we had, which was about 18 days. So, you can go back and search STS-90 Neurolab and, on the NASA archives or even Smithsonian, and they'll go through the different payloads that we had, the science we did. We were doing science from Woods Hole on aquatics. We were doing neurological experiments from University of Arizona in hippocampal implants in rats. We were doing, everything and everywhere. It was kind of a potpourri, so to speak, of different science areas. And, many of these researchers who would put these experiments forth had waited 10, 15 years to get it on a shuttle manifest to fly them. So as the payload commander, I communicated directly with them on the ground while the experiments were running. So we would inform them what's going on. They would talk to us, tell us what they needed, what they want us to do. And we would run the experiments, and we would be communicating all the time through Huntsville, Alabama at the Payload Ops Center, the communication center. It's like mission control for science. They'd switch us over to Huntsville once we got into orbit from Houston. And so the payload guys would be talking to Huntsville, while the upfront guys, the pilots and commander doing the shuttle stuff, would still be on the line with Houston.
Wow. That's really interesting technology to be able to do all that.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, even at the time, wow, we get to fly in the shuttle, but the shuttle was not new technology, even by the time I was flying on it. As a matter of fact, there's a joke. I think it was John Glenn made it or something, but you never want to be on a spacecraft built by the lowest bidder. And that kind of is what the shuttle turned into, right? If anyone wants to go out and search this, you should have seen what the shuttle was supposed to look like before it was cut in half budget wise. And, it got into the Reagan administration, and we ended up cobbling this thing together. And, it's the space shuttle. It's cool. It did what it was supposed to do, but it didn't do it nearly as well as it was supposed to do. And the original design had flyback liquid boosters, and much larger payload capacity, much larger legs, staying on orbit for longer periods of time. And we ended up with what we ended up with, but it was a great machine and did what it needed to do for the most part until we had to retire it because of the two catastrophes we had on the shuttle.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I digress, but I still remember when we lost Challenger. I was in private practice and I was doing a spay. I had a dog on the table and I was about to finish the spay, and I had the radio on in the background listening, and heard what happened. And I just remember stopping for a second, dropping the instruments, not inside the dog luckily, but just thinking, oh my God, I can't believe it. And I had the application in then, and everything went on hold for a couple of years, and then they recontacted me when they started flying again. But there's risk in everything, and we all know that as veterinarians. And you sign up for what you sign up for, and you hope for the best. And that's why we train the way we do, in veterinary medicine and in other fields, to mitigate that risk, knowing that there's always that over your shoulder thing that something like this could happen.
Yeah, it is. But we're sure glad you went through with it. All right, I got to ask you about something. This is particularly interesting to me. So you talked about in other forums, other media forums, about working on a spacewalk you did on repairing the Hubble Space Telescope, and it was like surgery. But when I think about myself doing surgery, I can't imagine, not being able to, the tactile feeling that I get in my fingertips. Now you're in a spacesuit trying to do that, and you had already you knew how to do surgery and use tactile. What was that like? How did you was that a whole different training to be able to use something as thick as a spacesuit to work like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. You pretty much give up tactility when you're in the gloves. You learn how things feel when you're in the gloves, that okay, this feels like this, so I know what's going on with my fingers on the outside, and if I apply more pressure, I get more pressure. So it's really the only thing you really have is pressure. Your pressure receptors tell you what you're doing with your fingers, because you're in a balloon, you're an inflated spacesuit.
Yeah.
They ask you what it's like to do an EVA, and I used to tell kids, and your question about being trained that way. So you go through initial EVA training, and EVA stands for extravehicular activity. You're in a suit, a spacesuit.
Okay.
And they kind of pick you based on how well you do. Like, is this guy or gal talented enough to do an EVA? Some are, some aren't. Everyone's trained to do emergency EVAs if something happened and you had to get into a spacesuit. But most flights don't have scheduled EVAs as part of the flight. And my third flight did, and I did well in the EVA training in the pool. And so I got assigned to the Hubble Space Telescope mission, the third, one of the last servicing missions. So my job was to go up and, work on the Hubble Space Telescope, which was pretty cool because that's the limits of the shuttle. It can't go any farther than about 350 nautical miles away from the Earth. And that's the reason the Hubble was placed where it was, is because it was put there by the shuttle, and it would have been better if it could have been out much farther from the Earth, but we had no way to get it there other than the shuttle. And at 350 miles, your tanks are exhausted. So you've got one shot about getting back to Earth with the OMS engines, which are the orbital maneuvering system. And you have to blow the engines down to zero, basically down to zero gas in the tanks to get home. And if you have an engine failure or you have a fuel leak, you turn into a satellite. That was one of the big criticalities with the Hubble missions, is that there was the point of like no return, where if something happens, the shuttle isn't coming home either, not much less fixing the Hubble, but the shuttle becomes a permanent satellite. And then you get into rescue missions with another shuttle, and that's where the emergency EVAs would come in, because if you want to transfer back and forth from the shuttle, you need to be in a spacesuit, or these giant beach balls they made early on, where people would get in and they'd pressurize these giant beach balls and they just push them like beach balls to the other spacecraft.
That
And
sounds a
it
little
sounds
scary.
ridiculous, but it was a really good idea because you could get in and out fast, you could pressurize fast, and the people in the suits would do all the moving while you just bounced around inside if there was an emergency. But again, I digress. So if you want to know what it's like to do an EVA, picture yourself in a suit of medieval armor on roller skates with a fishbowl over your head, wearing boxing gloves, and you have a pair of lobster tongs, and you're trying to change out the spark plugs in your car at night with no light. That gives you a general idea of what it's like to try to learn how to work in the suit. And so it takes a while. And, there used to be, we're kind of aging ourselves here, but there was a good book I read, I think it was in high school. It's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a really old book, but I bring that up because if you got frustrated and fought the suit, like, exhausted yourself trying to make it do what you wanted to do, and like, fighting it, you were going to lose every time. You'd be totally exhausted in a half an hour, and you would be worthless. You had to learn how to make the suit move for you, because the suit was only going to do what it wanted to do, but you had to make it do what you wanted it to do when you wanted it to do it, to try and move around and get your hands in and work while you're not banging, expensive hardware with your helmet, or cracking your faceplate, or gouging. One of the big things was you call somebody a Brillo pad when they weren't real good moving in a suit, because they'd just be scraping themselves all along the outside of the spacecraft or the telescope. And you couldn't do that. You had to be very, almost like a ballet in a giant 55-gallon drum, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, those
But
visuals are
yeah,
great.
the third mission. So I did three EVAs on that mission, and we upgraded the Hubble's solar arrays, cameras, and a bunch of other stuff. It was the most arduous upgrade of any Hubble mission. And then after that, the next mission, luckily, they got lucky and had IMAX cameras on board. We couldn't fly them because we had no room, because we were already overweight. But the next mission didn't have as much to do, so they flew the IMAX cameras, and they got to take cool IMAX movies, and they're all like, look at me, I'm out here doing the Hubble Space Telescope, and I'm like, hey man, I'm not in that movie, but oh well.
But you did it first, so that's the
Yeah, we were
veterinarian
there.
out there.
We were there before them, yeah.
Yeah. So I love the idea that you're working with other veterinarians who are interested in working in NASA or working in space. So tell us some more about your advice for a veterinarian or a veterinary student that would like to kind of follow in your footsteps.
As I said, I've been trying to get, I don't want to sound defeatist here, but we talked a little bit about politics, and we talked about where the space program was supposed to go and where it didn't go. And I tell people now, regardless of if they're veterinarians or not, that you better be real sure about your love for the space program, because if you get into the office now, you may wait 10 years or more to fly. And in that time, you're working for a bunch of people who don't really understand veterinary medicine, don't care. And some of them are bonehead pilots. They're the ones in charge. Sorry, all the pilots out there, but I was a bonehead too. I was in the backseat flying. So my point being that you're not in a veterinary environment. It's not like being in vet school. It's not like being in practice where everybody understands you and you get to do this, that on animals. It's like once in a while you may consult if you can figure that out, but they're going to make you do what you need to do in the program, and it has very little to do with veterinary medicine. So you got to know that before you come in. And I'm not downplaying it, but I think my opinion is if you're a veterinarian and you're interested in space, I would definitely look at the commercial sector, like Blue Origin, SpaceX, because they're going to be hiring commercial astronauts. They're going to be making their own lab modules, putting things up that way. They're probably going to be involved in lunar and Mars, modules and habitations at some point. And depending on how economics and administrations go, they may be the prime contractors for NASA, and that they make the rockets, they make the hardware. And, if you work with them and for them, you'll fly with them as commercial astronauts. So I'm not downplaying NASA, but I am up playing the commercial side of the space program because I think that's where we're ultimately going to be. And if you're interested, anybody out there, there's a really good show now that started on Apple. It's called For All Mankind. And my friend Garrett, who I flew with on my last mission, is one of the subject matter experts. And he's a professor at University of California, USC now. And he's an astro guy, astrophysicist, aerodynamic guy, smart dude. But he's been in a couple episodes already. And it's a great show because it shows the progression of the whole space program from the beginning of space, our history, up until they colonize Mars and they make a Mars colony. But the twist is, in the early days of the space program, we don't make it to the moon first. The Soviets do. And everything changes from there on in. And in a way, it's one of the best things that ever happened because it spurs us to really start driving and get there and put, our backbone back into our space program in the 60s and 70s. And so it's a great show because it's a what if kind of thing. It's like, if we'd have done this or done that, or this had happened, this is where we'd be. So if any of you are geeks, sci-fi geeks or space geeks, I'd recommend that show. Another show that I love is Foundation, and that's based on Asimov's whole Foundation trilogy. Another one of my favorite authors who I grew up with, read all his stuff in high school and college, iRobot, all that cool stuff.
That's great. Well, I got some quick questions for you now. So when you were out in space, what was the one Earth food that you missed while you were out there on orbit?
Pizza.
They don't make
no question. I was dreaming about pizza about 7 days in. I'm like, man, this food is terrible. And the shuttle food is awful. And then the best part about that is the one or two things they had that they loaded up with horseradish and Tabasco sauce and all that. And they put that there because nothing tastes like, it tastes like cardboard. And there's something about zero G where your taste buds don't work that well. Nothing works that well. You alluded to that before about what it's like to work in zero G. Well, it's hard. You have to learn. Everything's going to float everywhere. Your food's going to go everywhere. You have to be very careful. Hey, what happened to my watch? What happened to my silverware? Well, it's gone. And then 5 days later, you find it in the air vent, and you pull it back down again because the air vent had sucked it in while it was floating around at night. So most of the food are MREs, meals ready to eat, which are military rations. And, they're not bad. But one of the big things that happens in space is fluid shifts. So a lot of the fluid in your body shifts to your upper torso and you get really stuffed up in the head. You're always stuffy, you have headaches. And so I was eating things with horseradish and Tabasco because it opens up your nasal passage. It helps you breathe. And then some people started complaining about this is too spicy and they took it all out. So on my third and fourth missions, luckily the station mission, we got to eat Japanese and Russian food because we were up there with the Japanese astronauts and the Russian astronauts, and their food, the Japanese astronauts got mad because we were stealing all their food. It was great. Nissan, the noodle company, made a lot of their food for them, and they had yakitori and ramen and all this cool stuff. So when I was on station, I think I ate better than any of the other missions. So typically, when you go up on a shuttle mission, most people lose a lot of weight. And our first couple missions, we were doing a lot of exercise protocols to see how muscle degenerated and nerves degenerated. So I was exercising quite a bit and I didn't eat hardly anything. So in 17 days, I lost 13 pounds.
Jeez.
And in about 20 days, I lost about 15 pounds. And so you don't just lose fat, unfortunately, you lose a lot of muscle mass and you use it or lose it, right? So my heart probably shrank by about 25%. My legs looked like bird legs, and I didn't have a lot of muscle on me to begin with because I'm skinny. So it's hard to get all that back. So, that brings me to something else that we're going to have to come up with really good engineered diets. And on station, they exercise now 2.5 hours a day or so. And we're going to have to probably look at hormone therapy, reclass for bones, things of that nature, if we can't simulate artificial gravity, because you lose bone mass, you lose muscle mass, and heart's a muscle, so you're going to lose heart. mass, and a lot of other things happen to you that are going to preclude long duration space travel to other planets if we can't figure out how to keep people healthy. I mean, you don't want to get to Mars or some distant planet someday and say, we made it. And the ramp goes down, you walk down, you fall down, break a leg.
Yeah.
And that's the end of you, and that's the end of the mission, because no one's going to be there to help.
So did that come back for you? Did your muscle mass and your bones come back
Yes
for you?
and no. You have to work hard to get it back. And, let's face it, when you fly in space, you're no spring chicken. So you're already you're already in maybe late 30s, early 40s, 50s when, hormone levels have already peaked in your, mid 20s or so. And so it's harder to keep muscle mass, and it's a lot easier to lose it. So you got to work hard at the gym, and just be cognizant of your diet. And I got most of it back. Long-term bone loss in the pelvis and lower spine may never come back.
Mm.
You can supplement, calcium, phosphorus, all that good stuff. But the trabecular matrix actually widens and gets, I want to say, holier. So the trabeculae get sparser and sparser, and they never really come back and recanalize and reform. So your hips, lower back, things of that nature, spine become weaker, more apt to fractures. Not only, it's like getting old fast. So one of the prime models for old age research is that we send astronauts into space and we study them for weeks to months to maybe almost a year. And that would probably simulate 5, 10, 20 years of aging on Earth.
Wow. Never knew that. Well, what book would you recommend for all of us to read? Either to keep our career moving, or because of the space program, or just something that you've really enjoyed?
Well, I'm a sci-fi addict, so that's about all I read. But there's a good book by Bill Bryson. If any of you have heard of him or haven't read it yet, it's called I think it's A Brief History of Everything. It's a great book because you go from dinosaurs, to space stations in one book, and then there's there's a bunch of other books that I love growing up. I love Arthur C. Clarke. I love Robert Heinlein. I could go into a million different books, but most of them are all science fiction. So I'm a geek that way. And I would say, read what you like, read what you're interested in. I like some mystery stuff too, but I don't necessarily think that's going to help you in your quest to become a veterinarian or an astronaut, but it sure will help you in your moments of boredom. I know a lot of people on station, bring Kindles and have a huge backlog of different books they'll bring with them when they have free time in their cubicles, where they can kind of get away and shut the door away from all the stuff that's going on up there and actually have some free time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Dr. Linnehan. This has been both an honor and a privilege to capture your career story. I hope veterinarians and astronauts are inspired to just go for their dream, whether it's marine mammals in veterinary medicine or combining the two. I think you've given them some real food for thought as they think about it.
Yeah, I think I'm a prime example of put your head down, don't pay any attention to what people are telling you, which is really bad most of the time. Do what you want to do and keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best, and something will work out at some point, and you'll end up totally unbelievably where you never thought you would. And I think that usually is good, but it could be bad sometimes. But I would say that, and I'm being facetious here, right? But I would say be a little bit stubborn, and you're kind of in an environment in vet school, and as you come up through the ranks, through undergrad and all that, where you learn to do what you're told, and you learn to do what you're supposed to do, and maybe think a little bit about doing what you want to do and what maybe you're not supposed to do, and figure out a way how what you're not supposed to do is going to get you where you want to go. Maybe even a little bit better than what you're supposed to do, if that makes any sense. Have some fun.
That is great. That is such great advice. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of that wisdom.
You
Thank
bet.
you, everyone, for listening to Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story.